Nearly half of all students who require special education services under the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, require those services because of a specific learning disability.
And we know specific learning disabilities is a very common category, and so many parents have so many questions about it, specifically dyslexia, which is one type of a specific learning disability. So we hope this web show will shine some light on the subject for you.
As we've talked about many times here on yourspecialeducationrights.com, there's a difference between a diagnosis and an eligibility category under the IDEA. So a diagnosis by a medical doctor or a psychologist or a neurologist, any person who issues a diagnosis, that does not necessarily mean that the student is eligible for special education services under the IDEA's eligibility categories.
So here is the definition of specific learning disability. Under the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the term specific learning disability means a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language, spoken or written, which disorder may manifest itself in the imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or do mathematical calculations. Such term includes such conditions as perceptual disabilities, brain injury, minimal brain dysfunction, dyslexia, and developmental aphasia. Such term does not include a learning problem that is primarily the result of visual, hearing, or motor disabilities, of mental retardation, of emotional disturbance, or of environmental, cultural, or economic disadvantage. In your state, you may use the term intellectually disabled instead of mental retardation. So that's the definition under the IDEA. But how does a parent know if their student meets eligibility?
Good question. So like all eligibility categories under the IDEA, there's an analysis, and that analysis is undertaken by an IEP team, Individualized Education Program team, and we have an entire series on yourspecialeducationrights.com that tells you who has to be part of that team, but it includes the parents and certain service personnel from the school district, and that team looks at the student and makes a determination. Does this student have a specific learning disability which adversely impacts their education, such that they require specialized instruction? That's really the analysis for this eligibility category and all of the others.
So having listened to that definition, you may say that your child meets that definition, which doesn't necessarily say that they will meet the eligibility under the IDEA.
That's right. And so this is a definition. Specific learning disability is a broad educational category, a special education category. As we see from the definition, dyslexia is just one type of a specific learning disability. So then the next question may be, does your child have dyslexia? That's a different analysis.
Right, and we'd like to read the definition of dyslexia by the International Dyslexia Association. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. So while that's the definition under the International Dyslexia Association, there are many school districts, and I certainly don't want to categorize that as all, but in my experience and in yours, there are many schools who do not want to recognize dyslexia as a specific learning disability, in spite of the fact that it is right in the statute under the IDEA, and that is the definition. But that poses a barrier for parents.
It does, and I've heard that from a lot of parents that my child was diagnosed with dyslexia. I went to the school and they said, well, we don't like to use that term here. I'm not quite sure where it started. I don't know whether or not it's because the general term of a specific learning disability is much broader, and so that's really going to be what the IEP reflects if a child is found eligible. It's not going to say dyslexia as the eligibility category because it's a specific learning disability, but it does present as a barrier. And dyslexia, while it is very common, happens to be one of those areas where there's a lot of misunderstanding. And for that reason, we took the time to interview some experts in the field at the Kildonan School in Amenia, New York. Kildonan is a school that focuses explicitly on the intervention for students who have dyslexia. We asked Kildonan, what are some warning signs for a parent that their child might have dyslexia?
You know, it depends on the age of the kid. And so a warning sign, say in a first or second grader, would be difficulty with B, D, P, Q reversals, where they may see the word bad on a page and say DAP. Something like that would be a sign. But so many kids, they aren't identified, as you know, until much later. And so many kids are very skilled at hiding it. Or in some cases, for years going into middle school, the student is indicating that there's a difficulty, but it's misinterpreted as poor behavior, laziness, lack of intelligence, what have you, lack of focus. And so if we're talking about a 7th or 8th grader, you know, acting out in class, refusing to participate, those aren't always real behavioral issues. Sometimes it is hiding the difficulty, and that might be a tip-off for a parent or a teacher.